Hey, welcome once again to Rise of the GM. Today we are going to be talking about a plague and a cure, an anxious functionary, and using allies and integrating them into your campaign world. All of that and more right here on Rise of the GM. Well, hey there, Adam.
Hey,
how are you?
Hey, I am doing okay.
Your
It's cold.
shirt and that wall are active camouflage right now. It could just be a head and hands floating in
Yeah.
space with a microphone in front.
It'd be a really
And of
weird
course,
green screen. I don't know what
a bunch
happened.
of posters. If you take all your posters down, you'd really kind
It's
of.
like,
Well, that's good.
Yeah.
We
How
are
you doing?
are just a couple weeks before Christmas,
Mhm.
and where I work, we work in a college ministry, so.
Mhm.
Students go on Christmas break. At some point, things get much nicer here in the college setting. For all of you who are working like those normal jobs, I'm just going to make you feel bad here for a second. But we finished last night with our last thing. So today,
Yeah.
I didn't even really need to come into work because we basically have 4.5 weeks before the next thing
semester, yeah.
that's, now obviously I work over that break getting ready for the things that are coming, but it is definitely a much lower and slower pace of work. And so the only reason I'm in work today is to do this podcast in work. I come here to shoot them because we have good internet here and I don't at home, so I come here. But anyway, it's been nice. It's been a very laid back day, and I'm excited to talk about some campaign world allies and some other stuff. But we're going to say this at the end of the episode as well, in recognition of the fact that we are kind of heading into all of the holiday travels and the holiday festivities. We won't have the next 2 weeks won't have a podcast. So if you're a faithful follower who always jumps on here and hanging on our every word, then I think Adam's still going to throw some shorts on and go out in the cold weather. Oh, wait, some shorts on to his social media, not shorts on. And then we're going to be back on January 2nd. So it's just 2 weeks that we're taking off from this. And when we come back, we're gonna be talking about some amazing and fun things that you won't want to miss. So you can tune into Adam's shorts.
Sorry, Barry.
And in these couple weeks, and we'll both be back on January 2nd. But anyway, that's what's going on for the next couple weeks. But we are here today, and today we are going to be talking about allies in the world and how do you set up allies in different places. But before we do that, as always, we like to give you an encounter starter just to kind of spark some ideas and see if it's something you might use in a game. And Adam today is reading our encounter starter. So Adam,
I am.
Take it away.
This is Asking Nicely from the Eureka book. A plague befalls the PC's hometown while they're away on an adventure. When they return home, they're met by a man wrapped in rags. He's the last living member of the local church. He tells the PCs not to come into town, which is ravaged by plague, and explains that in order to save the town, they must quest for the Salve of Purity. The salve is located in a remote temple far from the town. The PCs must travel to the temple. They'll have at least one encounter en route with bandits who are planning to raid their hometown, knowing that it will be undefended. The temple itself is located atop a mountain, and reaching it is a challenge. Tough climbing, rock slides, and bad weather all interfere with the PC's mission. Inside the temple, the PCs face several challenges designed to test their resolve. These include a test of faith, like walking headlong into an illusion or something dangerous, a test of knowledge of the gods, and a test of strength, which is facing a superior foe. When they've completed the challenges, the PCs enter a holy chamber of incredible beauty. The Salve of Purity sits upon an altar, and as the PCs approach it, an avatar of the church's deity appears between them and the salve. It explains to the PCs that before they can claim the salve, they must convince the avatar that it is indeed needed and those who claim it are worthy. The PCs cannot harm or directly affect the avatar, no spell will be effective, and no attack has any hope of hurting it. They must persuade the avatar with their wits alone. The avatar will question the value of the town and the people in it, which, depending on the nature of the town, could make for a difficult argument. How will the PCs convince the avatar to give them the salve so that they can save the village? This scene can be tricky to resolve. You should come up with 3 to 5 points that the PCs must make in order to convince the avatar to give up the salve and allow the appropriate checks to learn how many points they must make and the themes of each point. The avatar should be played according to the nature of the deity it represents: compassionate for a god of healing, cruel for a god of war, etc. So this is asking nicely.
Asking nicely. I like this one for one big reason, and that is variety. It does seem like this is more than one session. Maybe you could fit it all into one session, but the idea of, okay, first they discover this thing going on with the town, right? And then they go, there's a small fight with some bandits, which, by the way, the bandits are going into a plague-ridden town. Why not just let them go get the plague? I guess they would still steal everything, but maybe you could just follow their bodies or follow and find their bodies later and get it back. But anyway, then you're going to go on, and it's this whole. So there's a mountain trail with like weather and climbing stuff, and we did. I think it was when we were talking about the types of fun, maybe somewhere in there, I got this idea of when people set up like a big sheet across some chairs and they make that the mountain pass. So you get like just recently, Adam had us fight like this big tentacle beast. Instead of just like imagining it or having a small mini, he brought in like this huge paper mache like tentacle beast that was huge. And just having like that difference can make things differently fun and more interesting than they otherwise would have been. And so like having something like that where you have like a sheet over some tables and chairs and there's some flat spots and there's like a path, but there are, DC checks of sliding and falling, and you have to figure out what happens if they slide off the edge of this, what's down there, and then how does that play into it? But those sorts of things are cool little skill challenge things. And then they get there and they have to do these different tests, the test of faith. So you'd have to think of an illusion of something that's dangerous, that's not just a foe that you attack. Probably some sort of like bladed whirling trap that's in the middle of a door or something, and you have to like figure out how you're going to get through, and you walk toward it, and then it's an illusion.
I immediately was thinking the Indiana Jones, like you can't see the path thing. But he walks out onto it.
Step of faith.
Yeah. I think that was immediately the thing I was thinking of with that.
Which this is called the test of faith. So that makes sense. That's probably what that was called. But something like that. Yeah. And then their knowledge of the gods. I don't know how you would do that, but you could come up with a way. And test of strength, you have to face a superior foe. So there would be something in here. I always think of like the manticore at the end of the maze, but it could be whatever. But then when they face this avatar that comes up that they can't do anything against, and they have to convince them why it's good to use it for this town.
Right.
I like this idea because at first this would be something for most new GMs. It would be like, oh, I don't know exactly. How would I know when they're successful? And it gives you that idea of being able to roll skill challenges by saying, okay, you can make checks to find out how many arguments you have to make, and you can make checks to find out what kinds of themes are good. But then you let them go from there. Okay, they find out some themes. They find out they have to make at least 3 arguments, and they can begin to make those, and they can use checks as they make those. But it can become kind of this neat little part that all different than just having straight combat the whole way through.
Yeah, right.
So that's what I like about this, is that it kind of mixes up different kinds of goals and roles to get your party where they need to be and get what they need to get, and then get back. And yeah.
I like this for the idea of the mini game, almost like kind of thing of, I think both with the mountain and the tests and the persuasion at the end, it's almost like you don't have to like talk about it with the players necessarily as that, but you have like these mini games happening in the middle of the game that you're playing, where it's like, this is a very different almost rule set in some ways. And I think that can be like interesting to mix it up, as long as you can keep that, like, we're still within the story. It's not like coming way out of it kind of deal. But some of the like terms, I think with that of like, making checks to understand how many like points you have to score or whatever. If that felt a little weird, but so I would want to share that in a different way, but like knowing that from a GM side of things, I think that is cool. with that, and I like I liked you brought up that idea with the sheet and the showing the climbing, because that's a thing I feel like I struggle with sometimes. Is like I had like noted here the mountain. I love the idea, and anytime I've played in that realm, I like it. Like I think a lot about the one you did where we were trying to get to the top of the mountain with the arch on it so we could ask the question kind of thing, and there was random things, but then there was also secondary thing in the same dormant mind game of different people. But the I think it was the purple worm where we were going up and then we were fighting and also dodging boulders falling down on us, and there's a dragon at the top and all this stuff. And I really enjoyed all that and felt like immersed in it, but I always kind of feel a little weak as a GM in those realms too, of like trying to make that not just feel like it's its own entity, kind of thing. So I think, like you said, that visualization of being able to see, okay, you're getting up closer would be a help to me. But I like it. I started asking questions. I think maybe it's just the way my mind works, but it's like, okay, dude in rags, how does he know you have to go to this forgotten temple at the top of the mountain to get this sal? It's like that.
Well,
that
he
kind of
was
stuff.
the last remaining guy of the church, right?
I guess so. So they would have the info of that, I guess. But
He's probably part of that temple
yeah,
that's
yeah,
and knows it's
yeah,
there. That's what I was assuming anyway.
yeah. And maybe he was trying to get there, but he's so sick that he can't. Like I like that. That makes a little more sense too. But
To be honest, I just saw that the dude, the prisoner in with Aladdin in that temple that was actually the bad guy. He tells him about the Cave of Wonders and sends him off to it. I don't know if you remember that part, but that's the visualization I got.
Okay, yeah.
The dude with the rags, and he's like got the gold tooth, and he's telling him.
That's actually Jafar though, isn't it? Doesn't he
It
like?
is.
Yeah,
Yeah.
he turned. Okay, so yeah, and maybe there's some either nefarious or somehow the Avatar has sent
The Avatar has sent its avatar.
its avatar. Whoa. Yeah, that I think that like some of that, if I was the player, I'm like, well, how do you know this? I'm going to question you now, kind of thing, and think having some of that. But I do like the way it's set up, and I was thinking in terms, with kind of maybe a different way to think. That Red Markets negotiation track, like the way that works at the beginning of when you're trying to like work a job. And I know we talked about that way back when we talked about Red Markets, but that could be a way, even if it's just me behind the DM screen, like watching that, or it's even out front for everybody to see, you're helping move this forward, and everybody's kind of putting things into it to help persuade this avatar to like, okay, we're actually going to get the salve at the end of this kind of thing. I was kind of thinking in those terms of like you could have that push and pull, with that too. So
overall, which you bring up an interesting point. I've always pronounced that salve. And I know there's an L in there, but
it may be salve.
I think it's a salve. Like I think that's how you spell salve that you put on like an ointment on burns and stuff like that. Salve.
I was thinking about the balm from Seinfeld.
Balm of Gilead.
The Seinfeld balm. I can't remember who gets burned. One of them gets burned because they try to bring a coffee into the movie theater, and they're gonna sue for the hot coffee. It's like making a comment on that whole hot coffee thing that happened. Yeah. And but he gets some kind of balm from somebody, and the accountants or the not accountant, the attorney. It's all cleared up before the case, and he's like, "Who told you to use the balm? Did I tell you to use the balm?" Because he can't like win the case.
Oh yeah, Jackie.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, I got to go back and watch some Seinfeld sometime. I really need somebody. I need somebody who is a Seinfeld aficionado to play Heads Up Seinfeld edition with me, because nobody knows Seinfeld or will play that with me. It's just got to happen sometime.
I have some very specific knowledges of Seinfeld, but it's not like a broad knowledge. It's just like Festivus, the bomb.
For the rest of us. Yeah.
Ukraine is not weak.
Ukraine is not weak.
The one that they're carrying the bottles, like they're trying to drive the bottles to some state to get money. That one's in my brain. That's basically it.
There you go. Well, with that in mind, let's talk about some allies in the campaign world that you might interact
Yeah,
with.
yeah, for sure.
Evan says a partial success of getting some salve, but only enough for half the town
Oh
can
yeah,
make a nice moral dilemma. Oh, I like that. I like that. I
yeah,
thought he was going to say something about Seinfeld.
yeah. Well,
Truthfully,
Rob
with
said
that.
he would play you right above that. So
Oh, there we go, Rob. You and I, because man, I just kids these days they don't pay attention to Seinfeld.
I do like that idea of like if you couldn't completely seal the deal, like what does that mean? And maybe that
Yeah,
turns into more of a, how do you replicate this, or how do you go back and only give it to, what do you do? So yeah, that's cool. Talking about allies, jumping into that, like you were saying. So this is the end of our forces series that we've been talking about. We talked about the NPCs within the party. We talked about summoned creatures, which is like a thing that specific players are doing, but it's again entities like kind of within the party, specifically combat or like exploration. And then last week we talked about the animal companions, familiars, and cohorts, kind of all in one bunch. This is still that idea of like forces in the world that could be like helpful to a party, but it's different in the way that these are not really what I'm thinking in terms of this is not really like these are allies that like join you, because that's kind of covered already in the NPCs or the
hmm
the cohorts and things like that. This is more as your group is exploring, or maybe from their backstory, there are allies that sometimes are formed. There's some bonds and things like that that happen. Um, and kind of throwing out the idea of like, how do we as GMs create space for that to happen? How do you capitalize on it if it has happened, or if somebody like takes interest in this specific group, they want to like make connections? How do you do that? Just kind of a like a really broad kind of idea of that. And I do want to like think in terms of like two different ways, before I just kind of leave it open vaguely for us to start talking about. But I think there is like the one track of like individuals that could be counted as allies. I think about like in some games where, maybe like a specific shopkeep that is very endeared to them, and like that may not seem like a bunch, but it's like somebody who you've like formed a relationship with and who could be like a help to certain things. Or um going back to red markets for a second, there's that idea of like references that every character has, and I think that could
hmm
like that kind of thing could play a role. um I think about like, in popular media, I was thinking in terms of like Q from James Bond, who like makes a bunch of inventions, or like even the Batman Begins, like the Lucius Fox, like it's kind of same idea, like they're giving tech to these people who are doing stuff. Or maybe there's a fence or an informant or that kind of thing, or there's like a king that you've saved, and they, that like there's all this kind of stuff. But then like the other side of that being like groups, like allies that are more groups. So it could be a guild or a cult or a kingdom, or like all kinds of stuff as big as you want to go that somehow you've allied with. So that's kind of the idea to start, is like how we would do that, what we would do with it, allies out in the world, both from an individual and a group kind of track. So anything kind of like pop in your brain as I
Well,
say
the first thing that does is this idea that even when you have the group, the faction, the guild, whatever it is, you still need to come up with an individual, because
yeah,
you don't interact with 1,000 people or
right,
100
yeah,
people. You interact with usually a person, and then because of that interaction. So, for instance, in our game that you're running, we were all part of the Jade Masks, right? And we met this woman named Rhoda,
hmm
and I mean, there was, Uncle was in there. Uncle he's the faceless kind of head of the group that we ended up um, taking up to a place to hand that off and hand off that title as Uncle. But anyway, then because we had made those connections to those allies,
Mm.
we could go into a town and sometimes people would recognize that we were part of the Jade Mask and they would give us information or they would give us a place to stay or
Right.
they would tell us about something. And those people, they have some character and you may develop one of them into more character. I think you had like a guy who was running a restaurant there in Bullens. I think it was Bullens. Anyway, who we would go to his place and, there it was kind of a known hangout for those in the Jade
Yeah.
Mask, and he would
Right.
also make food and give you information, that kind of stuff. But it can also be more just like descriptions of a character who's like a guy walks up to you and he says, "Hey, if you need to get so and so, blah blah blah," and you realize, oh, he's part of the Jade Mask, and so. There can be those, but you have to start with an individual. And so,
Right.
in any of these cases, as you think about your allies, you have to think about like who are the contact allies.
Yeah.
So if it's individuals, that makes it easy. But even those individuals, you say like a king, you save the kingdom. Well, that kind of makes his guard and stuff like that mostly your allies, unless it's one of those cases where he can't let it be known that he is allied to you, but he is on your side.
Yeah.
And so his guard's not going to cut you any slack, but secretly he gives you information or gives you, ways you can do stuff in his kingdom. And all of that comes down to the idea that there are going to be different relationships that happen because of the role of your allies. And so you have to think
Yeah.
about what all that's going to be. But as you look at your allies, I think a big part is deciding, how do you make these allies? How does the interaction come to be, right? You can have people who are your mentors or guides. You can have people who are specialists that you end up going to for something and they become a contact. You can have people who are political allies because you need to get in and kind of be part of the city's political in order to find stuff out, whatever. You might get those.
Right.
You can even have like unlikely friends, right? Somebody who would normally not be an ally. Say it's a monster that most people would fight that somehow becomes an ally of yours,
Yeah.
or a former foe that you guys kind of get talking and maybe you're upset and gruff with one another, but then you kind of find out you have this mutual respect and you meet up more than once and then they begin to like give you information or give you, whatever. There's lots of different kinds of allies.
Yeah.
And so you figure out what that's going to be and how they're going to meet. And then you kind of go from there, whether it's an individual or a faction. Right?
Yeah. Yeah, I really like that point of like it's not some faceless group really, kind of thing. And
And those are the hardest for me. It's like the whole, when we were talking last week about cohorts, I'm not going to lie. I have a very hard time understanding how to play cohorts well, because I feel like they're just this group, this faceless group of people that are something following you, or they live in your
like
hometown and do
followers,
what you ask and stuff like
Right,
that,
yeah.
until I can get a face or a couple faces. And that's really about, I can only hold a few of those in my mind as far as a cohort. So it's
Yeah.
hard for me to think cohort very easily. I think more allies.
Yeah. I like that idea. And like I was thinking about like the situation in the game that we're in right now is like uh Leonis, the dark elf. One of the things when you were in the Underdark that happened in kind of a negotiations point was, we're going to help you with like you guys were like, we're going to help do this, which is also securing our ends also. But he, is like a character point was like, I know I like basically self-exiled and ran away and I've been gone for decades. I'm going to come back. I'm going to promise that I'm going to be like, he basically is like giving himself back to them after all this is over, was like the idea, but kind of grabbed onto, but we need your help, kind of thing. And so that was like a backstory thing, but also got played out in game. But now, you're back in your like town you started in, there's a siege coming, and he managed to leverage that to bring, an army in to help like bolster the town defenses, kind of thing. But like again, it's to be super easy, but well, there's this huge dark elf like there's Drow army that's pretty faceless and boring. It's cool, but it's like also like it's not really like evocative to you at all. It's just they're there now. But it's like the people specifically, he has that like childhood friend slash fiance, or whatever, that's like Thalra is like the face to that. She's the commander. She's the one like doing that. So I think that's like a good point. And I didn't even really think about that when I was doing it, but that's the person that you're going to latch onto. You're not going to go talk to Drow number 403, over here to like,
Right.
that's not super interesting, I don't think. But I like that idea too. You're talking about the king. It was interesting to hear, like, yeah, it may be a secret thing, like for them
Right.
to, they may want to ally with you, but not let anybody know. I think that's a cool thing and a point worth like considering within the story. But another thing I was thinking about with that is like moving from like on the spectrum to individual to more of a large group is going to be, it's going to matter on like authority level of that person that you're connected to. Like random street urchin on that you've like befriended is not going to be able to rally the kingdom to come to your aid. Like it's not that, unless there's something else going on, but like that person's not going to be able to bring the armies of the West to come to the thing. So like knowing that, I think, is like an important piece of, if we're trying to like help formulate a specific story, there are like specific pieces that need to be in play, that they need to run into. Maybe that urchin knows somebody that they connect with, who eventually connects them to a thing where they save the king, and now the armies of the West are actually available at some point, if that's what the story calls for. So that reminded me of that, as you mentioned that, of like there is like an escalation of what's possible on a reasonable level, unless you're just like upending things and, oh, that street urchin actually is the lost prince who now can do, it's all the story. But yeah.
Where that street urchin is actually in charge of all the street urchins, and they overtake the city and then give you all the coffers, the treasury.
Love it. Yeah. I think it's good though. It's good.
So yeah, so you have these allies, and then as a GM, probably one of the things that's most important is to figure out, how are these allies going to fit into the role of the narrative, right? Are they going to kind of bridge plot points? When you don't, you ended one plot point and now it's like time to start another one. Do you allow the allies to be the ones to kind of push that forward? And how does that happen? Are there recurring characters, or is it like the string of characters? You met the boss, but now it's like you constantly meet all the underlings everywhere you go. What's the role of this ally or this ally group going to be in your story, in your narrative?
Yeah. To jump in on that, a thing I have thought through, like, I think there's obviously points to push, but I think that it's like the NPC thing we've talked about before, where like I would rather play more with an NPC that the people all like love or love to hate, rather than the person I think is like, oh man, this person's going to be awesome, and like no one cares about it all. But I just, you don't want to keep just like putting them in front of it. It's like nobody connects with this at all, so let's just move on, kind of thing. Versus Rolo, who like, we suddenly are like all about because he drives us insane, kind of thing. But he gets to be a part of that because it made sense and we connected with and we loved. I think that plays a role in this kind of thing too, and of course they are NPCs as well. But I think like the ally thing needs to be like, we put it in front of people, but it's like a player led thing, because of that thing where it's like, if I'm just trying to push, like, no, I really want you guys to, call in, which you have already, but it's like, I really want you guys to get H.W. Wilburton involved. So he's going to just show up constantly until you like bring him into the battle or whatever, kind of, or have this conversation to like help you with something. When you're like, no, I don't really want that. Like, we want to be choosing our thing. So I think that's important. Trains are extra loud today, by the way, too. Thin air or something. So I think that's like an important piece for me, thinking in terms of like I want the players to lead in like who they actually care about, kind of deal, versus me just like forcing allies to be used on things. And I'm trying to remember that when I do stuff, because I have a great love for the amassing of allies. Like that's in the WoW game, that very first game ever, go back in my backstory. It's like first thing I ever got into an RPG, with, I still have the notebook from that. And there is a list in it of all of the allies that we met along the way, that like I had this grand plan of honestly what it was. If you've seen the Portals scene in Endgame where all of the people over 25 movies all show up together to fight, at the end, it's like, that's what I wanted. I wanted to gather all the people against the bad guy, kind of thing. We never did it. It's like we never even got a chance. But that was like my plan as like a player / character, was if we could just get all these people together, we could make a change here, and so that kind of drives me. But as a GM, I know that like that's not what everybody's trying to do. So I don't want to like push it. So I always want to make sure it's like a player led thing to get them involved. I know there's a lot going on in the chat, so I'm going to pause on that for a second, but
yeah. I mean, some of the stuff going on in the chat, Evan talks about, first thing that comes to mind for him as a group of allies is you get a token from some influential figure, and people loyal to that figure know they should help out. So it's kind of like you flash the badge, you've got that token. And this, I like this kind of ally system. So I feel like I'm a big user of the faceless kind of faction. So you have a thieves guild, but you're known to the thieves guild, and these people just kind of find you every time. This is so great for when people get stuck in a party. They don't know where they're going or what they're doing. A guy just slinks up in a shady looking coat, or a really ragamuffin, a dude in rags, from the kingdom, whatever, comes up and just says, "Yeah, there's some people over there that I think you'd really like to check out. Todd's boy says, hey," and then leaves, and you're like, oh, wait a minute. That was somebody from the Thieves Guild. Or, if you have that token and all throughout this land, the peacekeepers are the king's peacekeepers, but they're, if you flash that badge, they're not necessarily going to do everything for you, but they'll realize, okay, this is somebody we can listen to. Maybe we can give some help. No, they don't get everything we have. We don't just hand them our swords or whatever, but they've got this, so they must be known. I love those kinds of allies. The allies that you were talking about are more of those individual allies, right? Where you have like H.G. Wilburton, or was that his name?
W.
H.W. Wilburton. And you have that guy here, and you have those people, or that guy over there, and those two up there, and those are good too, but they're almost like the extended NPC. Instead of traveling with your party, they're an ally. They're known, and they can reoccur, and those are the reoccurring kind. Obviously, you don't have the shadowed face that nobody recognizes recurring. It's always a different person, but with some of those people, they're the recurring ones.
Yeah, for sure. Rob wrote, when there's a big story point resolved with a faction, etc., I use a quote cleanup period where that faction isn't available for a while due to recent circumstances, except for one agent. So you kind of had this like encounter stuff going on with them, but then you're able to like have that single person that you connect with, which I think that's a good usage there.
And that can be anybody, and so it doesn't have to be the leader of the clan. Right. It becomes your point of contact. I remember once in an early game we had to go underground, and there was a group of priests or monks or something like doing some ritual. We went in and we went to town on them, whatever. But we met one of them, and that guy kind of became like our point person for like what was going on in that organization, and that kind of thing I like.
Yeah. Nice.
You always go to town on people underground doing rituals. I mean, it's a given.
never good. It's
It's a
never good.
given that they're not your friends
That's
usually.
my favorite trope to jump people into stuff. It's just something's happening in a basement somewhere. This is not good.
The cool thing about any of these allies or groups of allies is they can give real local flavor. You can use them to always kind of bring back and reflect kind of the culture of this region that they inhabit, and it kind of really gives a sense of place if you do it well, because they can have that added authenticity because of the way they act, and it brings everyone in your character to, oh yeah, we're here. Especially for someone like me in the Dormant Mine, you guys were like world traveling, and I guess we're doing that in the Jade Mask too. But like you guys were all in like East Varan, and then or West Varan, and then you ended up branching out and going to West Varan and the Strand, or East Varan and the Strand, and then you went up to Ramensat, and then you went up to Telashiri, and you're just going continent hopping.
Right.
The players that are your allies in those can keep you grounded in a sense of place, because Yulaweth, the land of the giants, is very different from Telashiri, the land of sneaking and thieving and all of that. And very different from the Ramensat Isles, very different. And so, really kind of keeping those locations by the allies and the way they act, kind of keeping those really separate and grounded in people's heads, are also very helpful.
Yeah, that does help to identify that, and even like, not that everybody has like massive authority, but like even like the power structures of places, it's like, these people have some authority over this, or the Jade Masks Thief Guild operates in these cities, but once you get out there into the wild places, they may have an agent, out there, but like they're not running the show out there anymore, kind of thing. And that does set a tone for, we're in a different place, kind of deal too. So yeah, I do like that.
I like what Rob just wrote in the comments here. It's a good way maybe to introduce new NPCs to link to your party for a plot point, or to get rid of an unliked NPC, or an NPC that you're just kind of done with being with your party. Maybe it's one that they love, but you're like, okay, I'm tired of always, this NPC jumping in and helping them in battle or healing them or whatever, and I need a way to bring them out. You can kind of make those connections and deposits through these allied forces. They get called off to another thing. They've got to go do this, or they, you go, they don't like the NPC that's with them, and they go here and they're like, hey man, this guy would happily join your group of monks that, and kind of keep us filled in on what's going on. And he's like, no, I really don't want to, guys. You're like, no, it'd be best if you did this. and then so he keeps you filled in, but he doesn't have to be with your party. So yeah, it can be very useful for both of those, to link a new one to your party, or to get rid of one.
Yeah. And I think like a good thing that spins out of that for me is like these characters have their own motivations and lives, like within the game, kind of thing. And that's another thing too. I don't think you have to like flesh out even all that much to like be able to work those things of like, okay, this person is motivated by, they just want to live in a safe place, so what does that mean, for them to like jump in and help these PCs, if it's just like motivated by safety, or this person actually wants power, like what's that going to look like? But there may be motivations of, okay, like I was here to help you, but the rest of this is not my job, so I'm going to go back home, and it's your thing. And I think that helps too, because there is that moment of like, we've talked about, I think through all of these things, is not wanting to overshadow the player character, like ever. That's not, you don't want to, it's not like game night is not about like my show. It's like, I'm throwing some toys out there for you guys to play with, and creating the sandbox, or like telling the like starts of stories to let you take it. But like it's not like I need to like take over with my NPCs that are so awesome and just like run it. It's like, this is about the players and the characters they're playing. And
that's like the big difference between the NPC that travels with your party and the allies, right? So the NPC that travels with your party, they're kind of engaged with what you're engaged with, and they're available. But allies may be unavailable. You may get
Right.
there and you be like, hey, I really think we need to do this. And he's like, oh, well, that's a good thing, but I'm actually doing this other thing right now.
Yeah.
I'm not
Yeah. Yeah.
available right now. Or I have my own priorities. You think this is what needs to be done, but that's not what the Thieves Guild is after. I
Yeah. Yeah.
applaud
Yeah.
what you guys
Yeah.
are trying to
Right.
do. And I know we've worked in the past together, but the Thieves Guild really wants this,
Yeah.
and yeah, so that's kind of cool. It also brings up this idea that like sometimes who your allies are may affect you with other people as well. If
Yep.
the Thieves Guild kind of has always come around giving you like little clues and hints, and you're also trying to be friends with the Shining Guard, they may be like, what's going on here?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So
That
got
was
to
a
kind of
fun.
balance that.
That was a fun. That specific balance was fun for me. I don't know. I don't know what it felt like as a player, but so if anybody watching the city they were in, they started out part of the Thieves Guild, but there was a point in the early game where they were getting jobs from the Thieves Guild, but they also were getting jobs from the magistrate who like ran the guard and who was more like the kingdom person. They didn't know it for a while, but the magistrate and the guy running Thieves Guild were brother and sister, and they had hostilities, but also love for one another and all that. Blah, blah, blah. So it was like an interesting, from my standpoint. So putting both of those in front of you all and saying, what are you going to choose? And you can't
And
necessarily walk the line.
we're like, I'll choose both. Thank you.
Yeah. Which is awesome. Yeah, that is good times to like think about even how does this affect other entities in the world? Like if you may be choosing against somebody else just from like a I lost what the word is, but like the way that they're functioning, it's like they can't both coexist if you're choosing to ally yourself with one or the other. So yeah. A thing that like I wanted to toss out, kind of like a little weird snippet of this, is like I think thinking about what you're going for in your game, in the terms of wanting to see, having a feel of like, are your PCs isolated in what they're doing, or are they supported in what they're doing, like in the game? And so like allies may not be the thing you want to create a lot of if like the PCs getting isolated is the story. If that makes sense a little bit, like trying to think of an example like story, but it's like if suddenly the PCs have to, they're on the run for some reason and they're, they're like outlaws, then there's probably not going to be a lot of allies around them, because the whole point of that is like you're isolated and you don't have a place. You got to get away from everybody else who's after you right now. But then maybe you start building, Robin Hood starts, gathering his merry men around him, and then there's suddenly a force to be reckoned with, kind of thing. But so that, I think that's a story that's like you could tell, and maybe the ally thing doesn't come into play as much. But if it's like, if the story is about creating support and heroics and that kind of thing, then this is like a really good tool to bring into that, so just like thinking through like what's the kind of theme even in the game is like a worthwhile piece of that.
Yeah. And I think more than just like, are they ice? So I think most of the time it's more fun for a player to think isolationist. They're like, our party, whatever we want, we're
Right.
doing it. The world bends to our will.
Yeah.
But the whole thing feels more immersive if in fact you have to have people that you're fighting for, that you rely
Yes.
on, that sometimes are part of what's happening behind the scenes. And sometimes those people may or may not be competent.
Yeah.
Sometimes you're like working with people and you're like, hey, I need you to help me do this when we get to sit. And they're like, okay, we can do that. And then they fail and you're like left in the lurch.
Yeah.
There can be betrayals, there can be misunderstandings. But when you actually work it out well so that their allies mean something to them, then there's more of a reason for them to care about the world instead of just the loot.
Yeah. Yeah.
Which is always that balance. You got players who they want to go kill everything and loot everything, and
Right.
that's a typical thing. How do you begin to get them to care? Well, it's the people and the place. It's like the reason. The reason you care about your home is because your father and your brothers are there. If I didn't have my father and brothers in your game, like what would Enscombe mean to me?
Right. Yeah.
Nothing.
Yeah.
And so what would Rothman mean to me? Notice I said Rothman and not Rothman. But this Wizards College would just be a place of power, except
Right.
for my brother and his wife are there, and the wife's sister that I'm kind of having a crush on. But they're the people. When I think of Rothman, that's the place I think of. That's the people I think of, not all the other wizards in the
Yeah.
college,
Right.
not whatever else is going on there. I just don't care about that stuff because they're faceless to me.
Right.
It's those allies that make places important, that make missions important, that may in fact lead me in the next leg of our trip to say, hey, we need to go figure out what's going on with this blockade at Rothman because there's people that are important to me there. Otherwise I'd be like, who cares about that? We're just going to do our thing here. So, I think
That's good.
I think allies are needed in the world in order to make it mean more
Yep.
in some way.
Yeah. Yeah. And I agree.
And
like
because what it does is it brings emotional stakes to the game. It brings opportunities for growth to the game. It has influence on players' decisions in the game. And those are the kinds of goals that when I'm putting allies in, sometimes I put allies in just to give my PCs information and direction, right?
Yeah,
Sometimes I put them in just to make, I guess allies don't make things harder. That would be enemies. But it's that impact on the party of influencing their decisions, like kind of pulling at strings and influencing their decisions. That happens through allies. The emotional stakes of what makes anything like matter. There are games where we've played, and I'm trying to think of one off the top of my head where it's very somber because somebody died who was not a player.
Yeah.
And
Right.
that happens only when you have allies in the world that matter to you, those emotional stakes, those opportunities for growth, whether it's a place to train people, to send you off on missions, whatever it is. That stuff all happens through having allies, different ally functions in the world.
Yeah. Yeah. I think you said
Caring is overrated.
you kind of backtracked on that's the statement. It was like, making things more difficult or harder. You said something about, oh, that's what like enemies are for. I do think like I agree, but also maybe complexity. Like even allies can bring complexities to it that aren't necessarily like they're always exactly a positive help, kind of thing.
Right.
Because it could be, it's that motivations thing of like, you could have an ally who, is their motivation is, I don't know, they want to be the Walmart of magic items in your world, and like they're gonna like ally with you and be friendly with you because you could like go tell people about your stuff, or like you could be carrying items to another city for them, and like it's like, okay, you just gave me a job, but like you're also helping me by giving information in return. It's like not every ally is just like out of the benevolence of my heart am I going to help you, or even like we you could be an ally with someone who, well, we were kind of minor enemies even, but our our focus is aligned right now against a worse thing. So now we're allies, but like I don't even like it, kind of thing. And I think some of that can like bring a cool complexity. And I think you're right. It's like the helping and complexity stuff sometimes, or one or the other. can be there. Rob's talking about like, says the vindictive ally is my favorite. They help you to spite someone else.
Right.
Like won them over for that, but then maybe when it's all over, it's a little different.
But there can even be allies that, okay, so in our current campaign, one of the people that's important to me is my father.
Mhm.
But we've never gotten along. He never has given me what I needed. And there's this part of my character that always is looking for his approval and looking for his praise. Can't get it. So he's an ally in a sense that I care about him, but he doesn't care about me at all. And it causes a lot of pain. So you can't have an ally that doesn't necessarily help you, but hinders you in ways. And that would be
Mhm.
my character's father.
Yeah. I think you said something and it brought this up to mind, but like a thing I'm thinking through with these from like a practical thing is like it's what you're kind of doing, I think, when we're creating the world and moving through it, but it's giving plenty of opportunities for NPC interactions, like they just like forming of allies, kind of thing is like giving plenty of opportunities for NPC interactions, and not necessarily trying to bend to like everyone's will, bend to your will, like this is going to be the ally for them, but allow there to be like some organic
Right.
pieces of that, like the forming of a bond. Because I think like you brought up, the Rothman, um, the people that matter, it's like your brother, his wife, her sister. Those are the people that you named off, kind of thing. But like in the middle of that, there were quite a few other people that you all interacted with that I have names for, but those I don't want to try to like force them to be something they're not to you guys. And maybe other players would be like, no, actually, this person, was the one for me. But I would rather give that like, if you're like, well, there's bonds forming there, and there were some from the backstory to begin with, but I'd rather like move that direction as a GM, helping people like feel like yes, they have some alliances happening with either these people or these groups, kind of thing, because there's been an actual bond form. So like throwing out plenty of people that are interesting, seeing what gets hooked, allowing for there to be more connection and more bond, created in those moments when the players want that. Um, I still think like the giving unique motives to these people like is always important, more and more as they get more as part of the story. I think like really basic motivation for the random person they talk to, but as like, oh, we want to go talk to her again. We want to go talk to him again. You start to flesh them out a little more. And if it becomes somebody who is seen as like, this is an ally to the group, trying to get a little more motivations to them. And then that idea of like, this is to support the players, not to like overshadow. Like those are like all kind
Right.
of things in my brain that like practically I want to think through, when, um, yeah, when I'm thinking through that. So I just wanted to kind of throw those out there too.
Yeah, I think always in GMing, it's a balance between planning and improvising.
Mm,
And it's a that improvising thing that you're talking about when a character of some sort becomes important to your party, then becomes a build on the fly sort
yeah,
of thing.
right.
Or at least, take this person and decide between sessions, okay, I'm going to increase their role because the party's dealing with this. And
Yeah,
it's that whole idea of not being running people on rails, but
mm,
also planning a good game. So,
for sure.
so planning and improvising are always going to be your yin and your yang,
Mhm.
your balance back and
Yeah,
forth
right, right.
as you do this. And so the same with allies. And yeah, that idea that no matter who you're playing, when you can bring in motivation rather than just like a character, it's going to help that character become more real. If they're doing everything from a motivation, then you know how to play that character.
Yeah,
And so
yeah, absolutely.
same with the allies. Yeah.
Yeah.
Anything else on allies here today?
Looking over my notes. I think it's a worthwhile thing, to check into. And like you just said, I don't want to reiterate what you all
Yeah.
just said, but that fleshing out of the world, it can be a really fun moments, whether it's like this person always helps me with specific items. I going back to that WoW game, there was always a guy who I would like design. Essentially, I guess I realized I was like Hawkeye in it, where it was like I was making trick arrows, and I would go and be like, "Hey, what about this?" And he'd be like, "Give me 2 weeks." I'm like, "All right, I'll be back," and would get like arrows for my ranger, and like something like that, where that was a fun piece that allowed for creativity, or like the moments where you've called in a favor and now this like army comes in to help you, kind of thing. Those play really cool scenes, I think, for the game too. And it can be, as in kind of any form. I mean, even if like you're more like, hey, I just want to do like a very straightforward dungeon crawl, like having somebody who's like, well, I actually, I have a lot of maps to these dungeons, and like being able to like help, like that's a cool piece too, even if it's more like this is like kind of contained within this, they can be really a big help to that too. So I really like the idea of using them. Obviously, I'm kind of in love with bringing allies into the game, and I've proved that I want more and more people connected to the party. So,
Yeah, I was just going to say, unless you're doing a dungeon crawl, and then you said the word dungeon crawl as I was
yeah.
thinking this. Unless you're doing a dungeon crawl, something like Tomb of Horrors, you start in this place and everything is against you, and it's just you against the place.
Right.
Get through.
Yeah.
Same thing if you do like a lot of the classic dungeon crawls. It's like you're plopped in a place, you've got to survive through monsters and traps and blah, 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 and then you get out, and that's the end of the game.
Yeah.
If it's something like that, ally's not a big part of it. But if you go out of that dungeon and you go into the world, if you have something that is more epic, if you have something that spans a single location, it's almost impossible not to have allies somewhere in that world. And that's probably just a difference in style of play. If you do episodic dungeon crawl, you may never deal with this, but if you get into like the real storytelling and narrative aspect of role-playing games, into that role-playing part of it, then you're almost always going to have allies in there somewhere. As a GM, then it's good to think, how do I incorporate these? How do I pepper them, salt them? How do I sprinkle them through my campaign so that they make a difference? And then, what kinds of fun comes from that?
Yeah. 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 I think, you can always come across like a prisoner in a dungeon that you free, and then suddenly they're your ally,
Yeah.
I was thinking about there was a video game, Dungeon Siege. I don't know if you guys ever played Dungeon Siege, but played some Dungeon Siege. And I always think, I can't remember what the situation was, but as you were going through the game, the video game, so it's a little bit different. It's going to be set up different, but like you would be traveling, and then suddenly there's just a person standing on the side of the road or the path or whatever, and you're like, "Hey, what's up?" And they're like, "I'll join you." It's like, well, now I have a wizard with me, and I remember there's one dude. This is like a weird story, but it's kind of on point. You're going through a cave or a dungeon or something, and it was later in the game, and there was just a random guy standing in the middle of the dungeon who wants to join your party, but eventually you can't keep adding people. You have to like keep it at a certain amount of people. And I remember being so sad because I had to leave one of the people from my very start because they were weak.
You're weak.
Like, I'm so sorry. It's like a video game. Nobody cares, but it's like, you just leave them standing on the side of the road as you continue on. So Rob's talking about dungeon crawl allies being interesting and, coming across anyone in a dungeon. So yeah, I guess you could like bring in other adventurers, or like the prisoner idea, or maybe a monster that wants to ally with you against some other ones. So yeah,
there you go.
Fun stuff. Yep. Well, cool.
Well, I think if there's nothing else, maybe we should move on to our NPC for today.
Yeah, let's do that.
All right. Our NPC today is the Anxious Functionary If you know what a functionary is, I would call it an administrator, administrative assistant, something like that.
Yeah.
Charlotte Morgan. All right. So Charlotte Morgan, what do you mean the flowers are pale magenta, not soft mauve? The feast will be ruined. Oh no, scratch, 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 writing some stuff. Charlotte's of average height and build, short blonde hair. She dresses impeccably in an understated style, common for her to kind of be the person who fades into the background until needed. She carries a bunch of journals and notebooks and inks and quills, and she's constantly like scratching notes and checking references. It's obvious that she worries about every detail, always nervous, frequently writing on her hands, making notes on her arm, chewing on her lower lip. She often jumps and sends papers flying everywhere when she's startled. She's a perfectionist who is paralyzed by the thought of losing her job, and she's always undervaluing her own performance and thus trying to nail down a host of final minutia, right? Always just trying to make sure everything's just right. She records everything to make sure that everything goes perfectly. Her motivation, more than anything, she wants to regain her former position of importance instead of being stuck pushing papers and planning tiny events of no importance. So here's the background. For years, she held a major position with important duties resting on her shoulders. But after making a critical mistake, her confidence was so damaged that she just couldn't concentrate, right? She made error after error until finally her superiors had no choice. They demoted her. With her constant written records now, she's managed to turn that stuff around, this trend of mistakes, but unwittingly, and this is the interesting part, unwittingly, she records a lot of potentially sensitive information in her desire to make sure she remembers everything she's supposed to, writing everything down. And that's where I think, for me, this character as the NPC can become important. Because before I read that last line, I'm thinking, okay, yeah, she's somebody who, I don't know, is scattered and has all this stuff, and you have to like deal with them, and it's kind of annoying. But then when there's this possibility that without even her understanding, she starts kind of trying to go through and get back on track, and she's reading some stuff she wrote down, and you can like throw in this like juicy tidbit of something that the Duke said to the, general that has to do with your party, or whatever the little bit of minutia is. You can drop it into this NPC in their notes, and they can read it in a rush and go right on to some more stuff that just doesn't matter, like the number of teacups that have to be in this place and whatever, blah, 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 blah. Right. And then your character's like, whoa, hold on, go back. What did you say about, the king and the Duke, and they then can be an interesting way to get some information out. At least for me, that's how I'd probably use somebody like this in a game.
Yeah, I like that. I like that a lot, actually. The like sharing of that, and then the kind of like rewind, like, wait, what? I think like the role playing part of that is super, super important for her. The way that it's explained, and like way back when we talked about, of just like inflection and mannerisms when you're role playing. That's super important for her to like get across that like worry and nervousness and like skittishness and all of that kind of stuff. I think is like explaining like, okay, she's scribbling while she's trying to talk to you, or she drops the papers because she got startled, or like whatever that is. I think that overplaying that is actually really good, because it's showing how much what she's like.
It can even add to the story. She drops some papers, and her ink thing starts pooling on one of the papers. She grabs it up real quick, but then it like covers some like vital information. You have like half a sentence that is like super intriguing, but then it's covered in ink, and she can't read the rest of it.
Yep. That kind of stuff, or like they realize, okay, after the third time she got scared and dropped all her papers, that next time we need to read what she wrote there about the general, we're going to make her jump so she drops the papers, and then the rogue can snack. Like it's like you're creating space for that.
He snags paper, and all it is just like 12 flowers per table. 16 people will be coming at 3:00.
Yeah.
14 people will be coming at 7.
Yeah.
You're like, we got the wrong paper.
Is one of those that I think she's interesting, but I like the idea of the PCs. Or so either her being a part of one of the PC's backstories, and them interacting with her and realizing she is very different than what I knew her to be before. Like they knew her before she had the kind of fall from grace kind of thing. And now she's like this worry bug kind of deal where it's like, okay, that wasn't what she was before. Why is this? Like you get to see that change, or the whole group having engaged at some point where she doesn't need to be a main character, but she's the party planner walking around very stately, knows what she's doing, very direct. They see that, they interact, and then later come back and she's now kind of a mess here. I think there's some interest to that of if you have a long enough like game to be able to show those things for them to get engaged with like, why is that? Especially if she's like a friend of the PCs from their backstory. It's like, okay, well, what's going on? And there's like role play that can happen in that realm too. So I think like she's cool either way, but I like the idea of seeing like what was and what is to like push things forward with that. And then I think that last line, I mean, you pointed that out too, but just that unwittingly recording a lot of potential sensitive information, like that's the story. There is like, that's what's going to like cause, if we're looking for the plot hook, if we're looking for the adventure, something about that, whether it's, I mean, as small as we just need to keep her busy so we can like rifle through her folder and figure out what's on her clipboard, or like something important was stolen and she needs it back because she realizes, oh shoot, I'm writing down all this stuff that's like super important to the kingdom, kind of thing. So I think that like opens up some really cool things. Probably not what, oh, good.
I think one of the coolest parts of it is it gives you a chance to give partial information that is interesting and intriguing, mysterious, without giving you all of it, because that's the kind of person she is. She just jots half sentences down here and there, something to remind her. Oh, a note. Maybe you're standing there talking to her, and on her arm there's the name of a person that's very important to whatever you're doing, written with like 2 words beside it, and you have to figure out what does that mean? Why did she write that?
Yeah,
and
it's shorthand, like, or like even it's what's important to her. She's not an information broker. She's like trying to schedule things. So it's like the Duke is never available at 2 p.m. It's like, okay, well, she wrote that down because she needs to have conversations with the Duke about what the dinner is going to look like. But now we know the Duke does something at 2 p.m. every day. We need to figure out what that is. Like I think that's like things where, thinking through like what's actually matters to her and how can that be a mystery to other people. Yeah, I like that idea a lot. That's cool. I think she could be fun.
Yeah. So there she is, Miss, what was her name again?
Charlotte Morgan.
Charlotte Morgan. Maybe you can use her in a campaign.
Yeah.
Do we have any Haversack today? Haversack questions?
We don't have any Haversack questions today on these. I did want to run through real fast, like what's coming up. And I know, and just like a reminder of we won't be on in this manner the next 2 weeks. There'll either be something on Instagram or maybe like just like a short on YouTube, but it won't look like this. But then when we come back off of Christmas and New Year's on the 2nd of January, just double checking my stuff here, we're going to have Josh Morton as guest again. He came on a while ago and it was like new GM perspective kind of thing. We're going to have another conversation with him to start the year out. And then we're going to be jumping into talking about, one quick thing just to kind of like think about holidays and New Year calendars and that kind of stuff, like what that could look like and how that can flesh out your game a little bit more. And then we're going to jump into this series that I'm super excited about on Place. There was a book I read that was a world building book about like creating worlds last year, and had a really, really good chapter on just the like importance of place. So we're going to be talking about places of need, and then an episode on places of note, and then an episode on places of veneration. We're going to talk about places like ruins and oddities, and also the people elements of place. So there's going to be a pretty long series of that. And also Eric Bright is going to be in the midst of all of that, talking about the RPG Starforge. So that's like that's like the next 3 months of episodes there. But I'm pretty excited about what we got going for the next year, and it's gonna be good conversations and good fun.
So we got a lot coming up.
Yeah.
You're not going to want to miss that. I think for today, we are going to say Merry Christmas to all of you and a Happy New Year.
Yeah.
I'll catch you on the other side when we're going to have Josh Morton. He is the best kind of Morton, better than salt. So you don't want to miss that. That'll be on January 2nd. And then all of that stuff coming up that Adam was just talking about in the new year. Looking forward to a great new year of Rise of the GM.
Yeah.
We'll see you guys then.
See y'all.
Bye now.